Well, welcome everybody. I'm so honored and excited to welcome Melanie Dobson to the Writer's Block. Thank you, Melanie, so much for being willing to join us today and have this writerly conversation with us. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and so fun story. I had put a post out on Facebook looking for a writer speaker to come speak at our retreat that's coming up in June. And a mutual friend of Melanie and mine, texted me privately. He's like, "You got to reach out to Melanie Dobson." And so I was able to kind of connect with her and just get to know her. And she's gracious enough just to come and talk to other writers. So I'm really grateful for you being here today.
Oh,
And we are kind of a group of different kinds and variations, varieties of writers. We've got fiction writers and nonfiction writers and devotional writers and new writers and, published and unpublished. But Melanie has quite an extensive portfolio. I was counting all your books today. Are
that
you, it looked like 28 to my count. Is that correct?
sounds right. Yeah, a little bit of nonfiction and mostly fiction.
Yeah. Well, tell us. I mean, I've got lots of questions, but tell us
Okay.
a little bit about you and your where you are, what you do, your writing, all of the things.
All the things. Yeah, absolutely. And if I would love it if everybody could just like maybe put in the chat what they write, like nonfiction or fiction or their genre, that would be super helpful to me. And I'll
Yeah.
glance at that in a few minutes. But yeah, I'm from the East Coast. Well, East Coast compared to Oregon, it's Ohio, which feels very East Coast from here. I was born actually in Chicago, grew up in Ohio. My dad was a pilot, so we did a ton of traveling, but we lived in the country. And so we lived out actually in Amish country, far away from a library or bookstore, any of that. And so when I was a little kid, the bookmobile would come every single week. And I would like pedal my bike over there and I would fill up my basket with books. So just tons of books. I would come home, I would read the Nancy Drews and Encyclopedia Brown as I got older, like Grace Livingston Hill and some of those books. Loved it. I felt like I was traveling the world like my dad was doing, in his pilot job. And so I would read and read and read. And then I get to the end of the week, I'd be like, okay, what do I do now? And so I started making up my own stories. And at like the age of 12, I was writing and starting to make up these stories. I just loved it. But I discovered at a really early age that finishing a story, well, the middles was very difficult. And then finishing a story was pretty much impossible for me. I'd get distracted with another book or something else, and I would just quit. And so as a kid, I would be all fired up, I'd write and write and write, and then the story would go away. And so this was a few years, and then I went on to college and I got my degree actually in journalism, worked at a newspaper, continued to write, but not this dream of mine to write fiction. It was about age 29, I think it was, when I finally just felt like this call, like God was like returning my heart back to my childlike longing and desire to write fiction. And so by then I had published a nonfiction book and done a lot of articles and that sort of thing. And so I just started to dream and I thought, okay, I've written nonfiction. Fiction's going to be really easy because you just make it all up and I can just go do this. And I started writing and I was like, oh goodness, this is hard. It's really hard, making up characters and you have to make it believable and, all the things that go into a novel. And it took me, by the time I started writing, seriously writing fiction, to the time I actually published my first novel, it was about 7 years. And I think Malcolm
Wow.
Gladwell, I think is his name, that talks about the 10,000 hours that you pour into something in
Mhm.
its Outliers book. And that's what it really felt like for me. It was probably a solid 10,000 hours and not drafts, many drafts of original books, but four complete manuscripts before my last one finally sold. And that's a whole different story, how that one sold. But that's sort of my journey into publishing fiction. And then ever since my first novel sold, I've been writing and publishing at least one a year, some two a year.
Wow. So you said that it took 7 years to write that first one. Is that
No, it took, well, 7 years until I was published. The first
okay?
one, I was writing about 1,000 words a day is when I finally got serious about it. And I was attending writers conferences. I love that you guys are doing the retreat because I'm a huge believer in writers conferences. They're so important. Learning from each other and also just relationships and the friends you made, especially when you're kind of at the same place and you grow together as writers. It's been really neat to look back at the conferences I attended 20 years ago and now being able to still be in relationship with a lot of the same people who are now multi-published and are out there publishing. So it was a growing process for me during those 7 years, but it was my fourth manuscript that actually was the one that ended up getting published.
Oh, okay. Wow. And now, like, it seems like the pace has picked up. If you're writing about a book a year, have you gotten quicker at it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
process and I can talk about that too if you want a little bit, but I have a process down as to how I write. So I write a book about every 6 to 9 months now is my process. A lot of what I'm writing is called time slip fiction or split time fiction, where it's a historical story and a contemporary story. And so there's two stories going on at the same time. And there are these two threads that are weaving back and forth until they kind of come colliding together at the end. Usually there's some sort of mystery. And so I'll write one of those, and then I'll usually write a biblical fiction, or I'm doing some chapter books now for kids that I'm having a blast with. And so I mix it up. So I don't write the same genre back to back because that would, my brain would be fried. But it's
Yeah.
fun if I can jump genres or do a nonfiction book in between too. I often do that.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. Well, Carrie said she's even listening to Memories of Glass right now. So
Oh, how fun.
that's fun.
I
I
love
did
it.
notice that you have quite a bit of audio versions available as
Mhm.
well. So
Mhm.
giving people that opportunity to consume your writing in various ways is great.
Mm.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about like some of the things that you do. I mean, obviously you're very prolific. You've got a system down. I think a lot of us would probably be curious to know a little bit more about that. Like,
Yeah.
um, and I know you teach workshops too. So
Mhm.
maybe in that, like, what are some things that you would encourage writers with in terms of what you've learned in your system?
Yeah, absolutely. And so my system is just I write one to typically, and every day is a little bit different, but I try to write about 1 to 2,000 words a day. And so that's my personal word count. Now I give myself a ton of grace, and those are not edited words. Those are just a pouring out. So I think probably one of the greatest lessons I've learned as a writer over the years is to give myself a ton of grace because those first words, I heard somebody describe it like this, and I really liked it. He described it as like turning on a faucet you haven't used in a while, and you turn on the faucet and kind of like maybe dark water or red, rusty water comes out or something like that. Like all the junk has to come out first. And then after all this dirty water comes out, then the fresh water runs out. And so that's
Mhm.
what I feel like. It's just putting down those words, getting it out, and then something starts to happen that I consider rather miraculous. You write, and then all of a sudden the good stuff starts to happen and the good stuff starts to come out, which is why I try and write so many words a day, because it's usually maybe I may be 500 words into it before the actual stuff starts to happen. So that's my word count a day. And then what I do then the next day that say it's Monday, I write my 1,500, 2,000 words. The next day, I start out by editing the words I wrote the day before. And that to me is so helpful. I'm just not starting cold again in the story. Like, where was I? I go back, I take those words that weren't very polished or well written, and I rewrite those. And I make them, it's not perfect still, but it's a little bit better. I correct some of my errors, I make it sound a little bit better. And then I'm back into the story. And by that time, I've probably written another 500 words. And so then I'm back in story, and then I can finish up my word count for the day. So that for me is really helpful just to get myself back right away into the story. And then what I do, because I know structure, I study structure. Structure is super important, but I'm still very much a discovery writer. And some people call it a seat of the pants writer, where I am learning my story as my readers would learn it, and I let the characters kind of direct me in the story. I have a general idea of where I'm headed, but I don't know the ending. I don't know, what's
Oh,
going to
interesting.
happen partway in the story, and I'm just discovering it as I go. And that's really important for me, because if I can be surprised, and if I have tears, and if I have these emotional reactions to what happens, then often my readers will as well. And so that's really important for me to keep that and not be too structured in the beginning. What I do then is that my word count for the entire novel is about 90,000 words. So a finished novel is 90 to 100,000 words for me. At the third waypoint, so at 30,000 words, at 60,000 words, and then at 90,000 words, I will stop and I will do a full edit of those 30,000 words. So I make sure I have a good foundation, the story is structured well at that point, I've got a good direction to go. And then at 60,000 words, which is my middle point, which is I've always struggled with middles. And so I'll stop there, because if I don't edit at that point, it's going to go off in some weird direction that doesn't need to go. So I'll go back, I'll rewrite it, I'll edit it. I discovered James Scott Bell's book, Writing from the Middle, which was life-changing for me about what needs to happen, particularly in the middle of a novel, to make it continue to be compelling and to make the reader still engage. And so I'll write it with that in mind. And then I'll go up to I'll finish it up, and then I'll do a full edit. So for me, it's very much a process, but it works. It's what works for me to get the novel done. If not, I'll either be spiraling off into some random direction that's no good, or I'll get stuck, or I won't continue on. And I've learned that I have to press through. I have to just push through when I don't know the direction, and then, something will happen, and then I can come back. I know I'm going to go back and edit it. I know I'm going to go back and make it better, but I have to keep getting the words on the page in order to make it better. I'm not sure if I answered all three of your questions there,
Oh
but
yeah. No, that's a wealth
my
of
process.
information. So in doing a little research on you and looking at your website, it looks like you spend quite a bit of time in that research mode. And looks like you do some travel to kind of set your books and things like that. So when you say that you don't know how your stories are going to end, like, are you just kind of feeling your way through the stories because you've done all of this pre-work of research, and you're probably have your characters pretty well defined, but then like the plot is kind of unfinished in your mind, but you've
Yeah.
done all this pre-work that helps you get there?
Exactly, right. That's really good insight, because that's exactly what I do. Being a journalism major, I love to research. That's so much fun. I could just research all day and never actually write, because I enjoy it so much. But so I have to give myself a deadline. So I usually do about a month of research, really solid research. I go to all my locations if I can get to them. One of my stories was set in Turkey. I couldn't do that one. So I put on my husband's his virtual reality glasses and Google Earth it to
Really?
Turkey. Because I have to, in my mind, I have to know, like, Carrie's reading Memories of Glass, that is set all over the Netherlands. And I went to all of those locations in that book. I had to see, to me, like, what does Giethoorn look like? Like, I think it starts in Giethoorn, if I remember correctly, but like where, it's this beautiful, it's hard to even call it a village, because there's all these tiny little islands with all these beautiful houses and gardens, and then there's walkways that connects them. And so just being there and being able to see the flowers and smell the flowers and hear the cowbells and see how it all worked, then I don't have to do, I already have that in my head. And going to Amsterdam and see where they hid the people, and going down to Maastricht in the southern part of the Netherlands, where all the caves are, the labyrinths where my book is partially set, and walking through the caves and feeling how cold they are and feeling how easy it would be to get lost in there. And it's like, by doing that research, I feel all those emotions. I get to feel it, I get to see it, I get to taste the wonderful food and sometimes the not so great food. So then I can describe it. I can go back and describe it on the page. So I do these trips, tons of notes I take. I do interviews with people. I get people, in Memories of Glass. Oh, no, not Memories of Glass. Winter Rose, which is a book that came out a couple years ago. I was able to talk to a gentleman who was in his 90s, who was rescued from going to a concentration camp in France when he was a kid. And so just, hearing his emotions and how he processed that, and, all of that, I do all that's my research. I do, I research online, I read a ton of books, I just research solid for about a month. I put it onto Scrivener. That's what I use to organize my research. Very helpful for finding things and having pictures and all of my notes in there. So I have it all compiled. What I do then is I take that research and then I develop my characters. And I used to do the plot for, kind of have the plot idea first, but I discovered that if I develop my characters well, they're going to lead the story well, and they're going to be really interesting. And then I can just kind of let them loose on the page and see what happens. And so I use 16personalities.com. I give all my characters a personality test. That's super helpful
Fun.
in making characters that are not all like me. Because
Yeah.
if not, they make the decisions I make and they react the way that I would react. And, that helps me make characters that I can understand. I don't necessarily relate to them, but I can understand how they operate, because 16 personalities gives me a whole breakdown. I give them an Enneagram. I give them a smart, it's called, like how God created them. Are they music smart? Are they nature smart? Are they book smart? Like
Mm.
what drives them from their being. And so I make super unique characters by doing all of that. And then I put them in a really difficult situation wherever my setting is, like in the book Carrie's reading in the Netherlands. I put my characters in a really hard situation and let them go and see what happens.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a fascinating and sounds really fun
it is
process.
fun.
So
Usually.
do you find that do you go to a place first that you're just like, I wonder who I'm gonna like what my character is gonna be in this place? Do you base your do you pick your settings first and then
Yeah, every
discover
story.
your
Yeah.
character there?
Every story is a little bit different. Yeah, every story is a little bit different. In the Memories of Glass one that she's reading, a friend of mine said, "Hey, I was in Maastricht, Netherlands recently, and I saw all these holes in the hills. Like, and I know something happened there, and you should find out." And so it's like, all right.
Uh,
So I get assignments, for readers every once in a while. And so I did, and I found out this second biggest labyrinth in the world, and they hid all these people there during the war, and it was just been, just
Interesting.
phenomenal. And so I have that piece, and then that's when I start to research. And so I've got a little piece, and then I found this gentleman by the name of Johann von Holst, who was in Amsterdam at the time, and his story at the time really hadn't been told. And he was, I don't think I'm going to give anything away, Carrie, if I say this, but he ran a teaching school right in Amsterdam, where he was training teachers. Next to him was a Jewish lady who had a daycare, so she was taking care of little kids. And then across the street it was a theater, but it became the deportation center for all of the Jewish people in Amsterdam. They were bringing them there. Just quick backstory, the Nazis, when they would go into the country, it was very different how they occupied each country. And so they knew that the Jewish population was very strong in the Netherlands. So it was very different than France, how they occupied it. And so they sent the people in the Netherlands, the Jewish people, to kind of a plush camp. It wasn't really a concentration camp originally. And of course, things got a lot worse from there. But at first it was very almost glamorous to be able to do this. So they would send them to this deportation center, and then they would send them to this camp. Well, rumors started coming back, what was happening, it was terrible. And so Johann von Holst and Henrietta next door, they came up with the plan with the registrar, who was Jewish, a German Jewish man at the theater, and they started sneaking kids out. And so they would take out one child and then, a couple more children, a couple more kids, and using the daycare center kind of as a front and the teachers as a front. And they rescued 600 children. Amazing story. And Johann von Holst was 107. He was still alive when I was working on the book, which I thought was
Oh my
pretty
gosh.
cool too. And so I had those two pieces. So I wanted a character like Johann von Holst, and then I knew I was going to use these caves in Maastricht. And so from those pieces, I started creating my characters, somebody that was training at the teaching school, a girl. And it just kind of grows from there. So I have those little pieces, and then
And it
that's
goes.
how my brain
Yeah.
operates. It tells stories.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So tell us a little bit about like how what role does faith take in your writing? Like, is it more of a subtlety in your work, or how do you view that?
Yeah, every story is different. There's no two stories where sometimes my characters are more upfront about their faith. As a Christian writer, there's faith throughout my, hope and joy and bad things happen and but good always conquers evil in my stories. So every book is a little bit different, but the reason I started writing fiction all those years, one of the reasons I started writing fiction all those years ago is because felt called by the Lord, but also because I felt really convicted that Jesus told parables. And the reason that he told parables was because you have listeners at the time, now we have readers, but listeners at the time who would come and they would hear these stories and they are all in a different place in their journey with Christ and with the Lord. And so as a result of these stories, they could put themselves in the story and they could learn wherever they were in their journey. And so that's what I realized with fiction and nonfiction. And somebody I think said they were writing memoir. And so with all of those, by telling stories, faith-based stories, people can put themselves into that story and God uses it in remarkable ways, whether or not we're
Yeah.
super direct or not, I mean, everybody's different in their writing. And it's so cool to me. Every once in a while, I'll get an email from somebody that say, you didn't mean your book like this, but this is how God used it in my life.
Mm.
And I'm just like, you're absolutely right. I did not mean it. That my story was not at all intended. I'm not that smart to be like, okay, use this in this person's life and in this seemingly random way. But God, you pray over it. I pray over all my stories, pray really hard, develop them, send them out there and pray that God will use that in remarkable ways. And then you get an email from somebody in Romania or Macedonia, or,
Mm.
God, it's just really cool once you put your work out there. And it's hard for me because I can be a bit of a perfectionist. And so to put my stuff out there is sometimes really hard. But at some point we need to do our very best and then we release it and let the Lord take it and do with it what he will. And that's my desire.
Oh, yeah. And as well as ours too, right? We just can't ever know what God is doing
Absolutely.
with our words. And you're right, like the way stories impact us and how um that is such a tool for us to learn truths that we couldn't necessarily learn face forward, right? Face
Yeah.
first. Like we learn by placing ourselves in a story. So that's so cool. Um, Tell us too, like a little bit about the scope of your work. Like maybe you could talk to us a little bit about like traditional publishing versus self-publishing and
Yeah.
what your thoughts are with that, with so many works behind your name now. I bet
Yeah.
you have experience in both camps.
I do. So when I first started out, indie publishing wasn't really a thing. I mean, you could self-publish, but it was a big ordeal. You couldn't just go on Kindle or Amazon and publish your books. So my first publisher was a super small traditional publisher called Kriegel Publishing, and they were amazing. They were out of Michigan, Cheryl, probably maybe not too far from you, and they were fantastic. And so my first book was with them. Every other publisher had rejected my fourth novel except for they decided to take a risk on it. And man, they were incredible. So I'm forever grateful for them. And I ended up publishing three different books with them before I went on to, I really wanted, my heart was to publish historical fiction. And at the time, there weren't any publishers that were publishing new historical fiction writers in the Christian market. You've been doing it for a while, it was one thing, but not for me, that wasn't the case. And so by the time my fourth novel came around, I was able to find a brand new publisher called Summerside Press that was doing historical fiction. And I had a
Mm.
story I wanted to tell. And so that's why I ended up changing publishing houses. And so I've been publishing is such a weird thing. You all know this. It's like, you have an imprint and then the imprint will go away. And so you have to find another publisher and you sometimes have to write more for the market than for what necessarily you want to write if you're writing for a traditional publisher. And so I think I've written for 7 publishers now over the years.
Wow.
Now I'm with Tyndale House out of Chicago, and Guideposts. Write some stuff for Guideposts in their series. And they're both fantastic, and they've both been around forever. So hopefully I'll be able to stay with them for a long time. I've been with them for a good bit. But what I did, the Summerside Press, that original publisher back in what it would have been like 2007, 2008, when I first started publishing with them, they they sold out, they sold to another publisher. Basically, I was able to get all my rights back for all my books with them, and there are 8 of them.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I took all 8 of those novels, and I didn't want to sit on them. You've got all of this. It's I think sometimes of writing as you're investing, but you're not investing in another company, you're investing in yourself as a writer. And so I wanted to invest, instead of, invest in stock someplace else, I wanted to invest in this series. And so I took these 8 novels. They're not related by story, but they're all historical fiction. And so I created this series. It's called Legacy of Love series. And I have a tagline about historical events throughout the US, and these romantic, some of them are suspense stories. And so I created this tagline. I created, 1 through 8. I created a series. I put it up there on Kindle at first. I didn't have paperbacks at first. And I put it on Kindle Unlimited because I knew a lot of people, they're older stories. And that was fantastic, because a traditional publisher pays you every 6 months if you have enough sales from the royalties. Amazon pays you every month, which is so great. So you just get the money that comes into your account. And so so I really like that balance of being able to have both. I've since done a nonfiction book, a book on how to write split time or time slip fiction on Amazon. And we did that indie just because we wanted to get it out there. That was my 2020 book. And then now I started to do this chapter book series, and I can do that pretty easily, just getting that on Amazon as well. And so
Oh,
I've done both sides of it. I don't necessarily say I prefer one or the other. They both have pros and they both have cons. It's been really nice to be able to do them together and have
yeah.
both. Yeah.
Wow. And I'm just amazed. I'm just amazed at the breadth of work that you have, and that you can do both simultaneously. That's really great. We have some questions popping up in the chat, so I don't want to get too far off of and away from those. Space asked, this was a while ago, how did you find the guy from Amsterdam? How did you, who was the inspiration for your character?
I had to dig. I had to really dig. I did a lot of Googling, like just to find a story. I was just trying to find a story that I thought would be compelling enough that hadn't been told yet. And I ended up finding online, I found, I think it was an old, maybe a newspaper article. I can't remember exactly what the first thing that I found about him. And then I started doing some research, and then I went to, Righteous Among Nations, I think is what it's called, where they give out awards to people who aren't Jewish, who helped Jewish people during World War II.
Mm.
And so I wasn't able, I found Johann on kind of a little bit of his story online. And I found one of his colleagues who he used to teach with. And Johann had been named as Righteous Among Nations. And then I was able to track down one of his colleagues through that. And I just sent a cold email. His name was Gunther. And I was like, hi, Gunther, this is who I am. I really want to tell Johann's story. And he was able to connect me then with Johann's daughter. And so it was sort of this
Wow.
Christy sort of thing. But I have no qualms with just cold emailing people. People are usually so great about getting back to me. I just actually, just a couple months ago, I one of the things in an upcoming book I have is a book that's been burned years ago. It was in a fire. Somebody tried to burn it years ago, and it's still intact. And I wanted to know what it would smell like. I'm like, does it still smell? Like, how does that work? This is really important to the story. And so I contacted a guy online who does restoration for books that have been hurt or burnt or whatever. And he emailed me back. I think it was within 5 or 10 minutes. He was so excited and he wanted me to call him. And so I did. Turns out he was a Christian. He was so excited that I was a person of faith. And he told me exactly what I needed. And, like, yes, it would still smell. And this is what it would smell like. And we can do only so much to restore it. We can make it look
Yeah.
nice, but that scent is going to go with it for the rest of its life. And I was like, oh, this is for my story, it worked. But I find that when people are passionate about whatever it is they're passionate about, they want to talk about it. And so
Yeah.
whatever random thing, I've rarely run into somebody who says, no, they won't talk to me. One time I was researching the Amana colonies in Iowa, and I was going to write a story based on the Amana colonies. And a lady there who I'm told, Emily was her name, she's supposed to know everything there was to know about the Amana people. And she wouldn't talk to me. I would like called her. I was like I found I was a small town. I found her, she just wouldn't talk to me. And finally, I think she called me back and she's like, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to talk to you. You're going to get it all wrong. Everybody always gets it wrong. And I said, well, how am I supposed to get it right if you won't talk to me? You
Right.
know? And she's like, I'll meet you in a half hour. And so she did. She met me and she was really kind, and what she told me like changed my whole story. It was like she told me that the Amana people for the last 100 years are all about relationships, particularly with their friends. Like girlfriends were everything to an Amana woman, which is very different from the Amish or from different other religious groups. And I sent her the book when it was done. I hope she was happy with it. I did my best, but for the most part, people are really good about talking if they're passionate about it, something.
Yeah. And then they get to be a little bit of part of a backstory of something bigger.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, and Amy asked, do you have certain periods of history or topics that you gravitate towards?
Hmm. I do I cry? That's great. I just did a story set in the Gilded Age. That was super fun. It was a Thousand Islands in New York. Back when the mansions, they were using all these castles, really. They were using these castles, and it was just, I don't know, it was just sort of a magical era and place. And lots of bad stuff happened then too. But I enjoyed writing about that. I don't necessarily gravitate towards World War II, but readers do. And
Mm,
so my publisher has asked me repeatedly to write, can you do another World War II story? And I always say, well, I will if I have a story. I need to have something that hasn't been told before. I don't want to write the same thing that's happened over and over again. And I think I will be having another one coming up in the next couple of years. I have another idea for one that hasn't been told yet. But I only want to write stories that haven't been really explored. I don't want to be a repeat of other stories that haven't
mm.
been told. But I love history, so I'll really write just about any era. It's more about what the publisher can sell than it is about me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how far in advance are you looking right now in terms of your writing calendar?
Oh, I have ideas all the time. It's a real problem, actually. It's like, I'm like, focus, Melanie, focus. So I have right now, I'm finishing up a biblical fiction story for Guidepost. It's about an underground network of Hebrew people who were basically when Pharaoh gave the edict to kill the Hebrew boys. I looking at history, I suspect that more moms than just Jochebed were trying to hide their babies. And so I've created this novel around that story of people trying to rescue their baby boys from Pharaoh and from the Egyptian edict to kill them. And so I'm working on that one. And then I have one coming up that I'm in edits right now. That one's set in the late 1800s. It's about a religious community called the Oneida Society that became Oneida Silverware years later.
Mm,
That one's almost done. And then I have another one coming up that I'm super excited about, set in the 1940s, about a novelist who disappears actually, and nobody knows what happens to her. So that's going to be a time slip mystery. And then I have ideas for probably four more that
wow.
will be after, we'll those are not solidified yet or contracted for. Yeah.
Yeah, that's enough to keep you busy for
It
the
is.
foreseeable future.
Yeah.
That's exciting. So tell us a little bit about like what does the background look like behind the stage of what it takes to put together a book? Like Carrie asked if you have a team working with you with your
Yeah.
self-publishing and even like with your traditional publishing, like how 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 much of a community effort is
It's a
what you're
community
doing?
effort. It's absolutely a community effort. The writing, it's a solo process, and I'm an ambivert, so I'm not all introvert or extrovert. I kind of like write down the road personality wise. So I like to be with people, and then I like to go write, and kind of this back and forth thing. So I have a writers group that meets in my house once a month. We've been together for 17 years. I can hardly believe
Wow.
it, and very little turnover. So we know each other's stories really well and our passions really well. And we just pour in, like, once a month, we critique each other. We pour, like, in a very kind way, but we pour into each other's stories and help each other grow as writers. So that's a really important, like, as far as a team, like for my writing, that's a really important part of my process. I have a first reader. Her name's Michelle. She reads all of my stuff before it goes out. She gives me great feedback. And then when I traditionally publish, I have a whole, like, Tyndale Guideposts have a whole editorial team that goes through it. They have the design teams. I have some feedback sometimes on my covers, not always, but Tyndale really gets my input for the covers. And then they market it, they distribute it. Tyndale does all of that. So I have very little part of that. Um, when I do the indie publishing, I am in charge of everything, but I just got a cover back this morning for my next chapter book. So I farm that out, to somebody else to do. I hire usually 2 editors, a developmental editor, and then a copy editor. And then I'll have somebody that I know that's good proof it before it goes out. I'm hiring somebody to do artwork this time because the kids that read it say you need art inside the book. So I'm working on that right now. But there's a few tricks that I've learned that I don't have an administrative assistant like a lot of authors do that because I like to do a lot of this. And so I use BookBrush to do all my graphics, or Canva
Mm.
sometimes, but usually BookBrush which is a subscription service. But for me, it's really worth it because it's super easy. I just go in, I throw a few things in, it makes all my social media graphics. And
Mm.
they do a great job. I use that. I have a newsletter service because when I go to market my traditional published books or my indie published books, I need to get it out there to let people know about it. And so I use Mad Mimi instead of MailChimp or some of the other popular ones. Your newsletter is the most important marketing, I should say. Your next book that comes out is your most important marketing tool. Then it's your website, and then it's your newsletter. And then usually fourth is social media. It's all important depending on your genre, but those are what I found to be the most important. And so I spend time marketing, but I spend more time writing than I do marketing because I know that my best marketing tool is to have another book get out there. People are talking about it.
Yeah.
And once, I get readers all the time that say, "Oh, I just discovered your latest book." And then they go back and they read all 28 of the others, so, and that's what you want. You want people
Yeah.
to go back and read your backlist, if
Oh,
they
that
like it.
you
Yeah.
you named some new tools. I hope you all, I didn't want to distract myself, but I hope you guys took some notes. I'm going to look at some of those. BookBrush was one that you mentioned about social media, but I want to talk to you about your email list. I think
Mhm.
that's something we all have in common here.
Yeah.
Trying to build an email list, and um, maybe tell us a little bit about how do you use your monthly newsletter?
I don't do it every month. I do it every other month and sometimes every 3
Okay.
months. I am not super consistent about that because, again, my best marketing tool is to write another novel, and it takes me a lot of time. It surprisingly amount of time for me to write a newsletter and design it. But I use Mad Mimi is the one that I use just because it's really user friendly and makes the design and stuff really easy for me. I use it. Sometimes I'll give like a little story about what's going on in my life. People tend to really like knowing those personal stories. I don't spend a lot of time doing that, but I'll do, my oldest daughter is getting ready to have a baby, our first grandchild. And so, letting people know about that is really fun for me and seems to be fun for other people to hear. And so I'll usually do a little story, and then what's going on in my writing, like what's happening in my writing world, what's coming up. Um, and then if I have any giveaways for my stuff, so if a book's on discounted, if something's happened, for that, people like to know that. And what I've discovered that my readers, and everybody's different, but my readers really seem to like learning about other people's novels and not just mine. And so at the end of, I think doing this. I've only done it for the past probably 6, 8 months, but I think I'm going to do this consistently. I pick a novel that I've read that's a friend of mine's novel, and I ask them if they'll do a giveaway, and everybody always says yes, and because it's great marketing for them too. And so I'll do like a little blurb about why I liked it, and then they'll do the giveaway, and then people will sign up for that. So
I
that's
love that.
sort
Yeah.
of everybody's is different, but that's what I found works for me.
A little bit of cross marketing channels there. That's really
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just signed up for your newsletter today, so I
Oh,
will look forward
well, thank
to
you.
getting those in the future.
That's so fun.
So I just wanted, we've kind of been all over the map. I've tried to touch on some things that I thought maybe this audience in particular would appreciate, but I'd like to invite you guys to unmute, ask questions, or pop them into the chat, whichever you're most comfortable with. But we have a wealth of resource here with Melanie.
I was interested about the personality tests because I go down the rabbit hole on some of those things. So
Yeah.
do you find that you do create unique characters?
I do find that. Yeah, thankfully, just the system that I've worked out has helped me to do that. The key questions that I have found that I need to learn about my character are how they react. Do they react? And Enneagram is really good like with this, of their gut, their head, or their heart. Because if I don't have my characters react to something bad in a way that's true to them, my readers know it. And so their reactions are more important than their actions. And so that's what Enneagram helps me with. Now I could really go down and like, it could get really, I can get too complicated on it. So I try and just have some high points. Like I know what their 16 personality, I know what their personality is, and 16personalities.com, when you take that test, it gives you all sorts of examples of people that have similar personalities and how your character will tend to act in a situation, maybe not react, but at least act in certain situations. It's been so helpful. I had the Hidden Among the Stars, one of my books. I had a character in that book who was a bookstore owner, but her personality was so different than mine. And I wanted her to be believable. And so I did the 16 personalities, and I realized it said only 1% of people have this personality. And I was like, oh, well, this is why it's so hard for me to write this character, because, it's a rare personality. But I wanted her to have this personality. So I did that. I did the Enneagram. I tried to stay true to her character through the whole book. And I got this email from somebody. It was so special for me. She's like, I read all the time. I never had met a character before that was anything like me. And this character is just like me. I was like, oh, thank you. This is the 1%, but I was so amazed.
She was a 1%er.
Yeah. So I was so happy that I was able to nail her personality, even though it was nothing like me. Yeah. Did that answer your question, Kathy?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else?
I'd like to kind of follow up on that, because I am working on my very first novel, and how do you remove then yourself? Because my main character, I did that. I was like, she's going to be an Enneagram such and such, because I'm familiar with that. But I find myself writing her, responding and acting like me and thinking like me. I don't know how to remove that and put in a different personality.
Yeah, I know it's hard. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's part of you is in every character you write. It just is. And that's the beauty of being a novelist. Like it's going to be there a little bit. But I would, I wouldn't worry about it on your first draft. I would just get the story out there. And then I would go back and specifically with the reactions, whatever her Enneagram is, if she's a head, heart, or gut. Yeah, thank you. I would go back and just, if that's where your area is that you're struggling, I would every reaction, is this head, heart, or gut? And just like explore every reaction and say, okay, this is how I would react, but she, I would react with my heart, but she would react with her head. The best thing, well, one of the best things, an example that I use in workshops, I should say, is have any of you seen the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society movie? It's a great book, but it's also on Netflix. And if you watch it, and I will get it just for a month at a time, just to show it at workshops because you can't actually buy it. But if you watch it and you map out it has a whole cast of really good characters that are doing really good things, but they all react very differently. So the Nazis are occupying Guernsey Island, and they all want to help, but they all have, some of them are head reactors, some of them are heart, some of them are gut reactors. So if you go through and you sort of analyze that and you see the different characters and how they react, that's been really helpful for me. And I don't want to ruin movie watching for you or anything, but as you read books or as you watch movies, just see how the characters react. And if it's true to themselves, it makes me so frustrated if I'm watching a show and a character reacts in a way that's not seemingly true to them after, after watching their character for so long. And it does frustrate readers too.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your workshop that you offer? Is that something that you offer online, or is that an in-person?
It's in person, and I do all sorts of workshops. I've got, I'm speaking in Seattle. Nobody's on this side of the coast, but are you, where are you again, Carrie? Oh, I'm sorry.
San Diego.
Yeah, I remember now. Yeah. So actually I'll be, I'm speaking in Seattle. I'm doing one on structure, which is hilarious because like I said, I'm a discovery writer, but I have an appreciation for structure. I have to go back and make sure it's structured well after I write the story. And I'm doing one on write what you don't know, on researching, which is really fun for me. And then I'm actually speaking in California in, the Sacramento area, I think, in November. And that one will be, I think, the Write What You Don't Know. And I'll be at American Christian Fiction Writers talking about, that's in, let's see, where is that? That's in New Orleans in September. If anybody's going, that story is on Spark to Story. So like, how do you have an idea and then implement that, move it all the way through story? So those are some I have coming up. I do workshops on all sorts of things.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Go ahead, Cheryl.
When will you be in Seattle, Melanie?
Seattle is in April, like
Oh, okay,
look
this
up the
month.
date. That one is April 26th and 27th. It's the Northwest Christian Writers Conference.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to be taking a trip to Seattle in June, and so I thought.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Wouldn't that be
sorry.
nice?
Now, I know some of these conferences, they record them and sell them later too. I don't know what they're doing with that particular conference.
Where did you say you were located, Melanie?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Where did you say you're located
Oh,
now?
I'm outside Portland, Oregon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll be actually, Oregon has a writers conference coming up too. I'm doing that one. That one is in June, actually.
Is that the Cascade?
Yes, the
Yeah.
Cascade Christian. Yeah, they changed it to Cascade Christian. I used to be Oregon Christian Writers, Cascade. I don't know what I'm talking about there. They said talk about something. So do you have any ideas? What should I talk about? I don't know what it'll be.
Well, maybe in just the last few minutes in our group, maybe you could just give us some things that you've learned over the years, maybe like how you keep going. We've talked a lot about your process. I don't know if other people have questions about that, but I'll just leave it open to you. Like what's some advice you would give to writers who maybe want to be published or just wanting to start writing? How do you keep going?
I'm writing that down. A few things over the years, because those first 7 years, there were a lot of rejections. I have a whole stack of them. What's ironic is that novel I was telling you about where the main character was, had the 1% personality hidden among the stars. That book came out, I want to say like 2000, maybe 17. And that was one of those first 4 novels that I wrote. So that was a novel I wrote back, late 90s, early 2000 that was rejected. And I reworked it. And obviously I grew a lot in those years as a writer, and the same publisher that rejected all those years ago ended up publishing it.
Oh,
So you
that's
just
sweet.
never know.
Yeah.
So I always say, like, sometimes maybe you have a full round of rejections. That doesn't mean it's forever. Put it aside and wait and see what happens. Being flexible for the market is if you're wanting to do traditional publishing. keeping an eye out on what people are reading, asking bookstore owners, what people are, especially Christian bookstore owners, if that's the genre you're wanting to write in, what are people reading? Just being aware of that, or, what's coming up that people may want to read, just being aware of trends and writing for that if you have something to say. And I also, something I started early on in my career because I was getting so many rejections, and sometimes you get mean notes from people. It just happens, and it's hard. I once had a editor actually tell me that not even a doctor could revive my writing. And
Ooh,
so it was like, that
ouch.
set me back a couple of days. I was like,
Yeah.
and some people are just mean. It just is, this industry, you kind of put your heart out there, you put your words out there, and people can be really unkind. And so I started a sunshine file, I call it, and I have a physical one, I have one on my computer. And when I get just a delightful note, or, the lady that wrote and said, oh, this isn't how you meant the book, but this is how God used it in my life, stuff like that, that just as a reminder, okay, God called me to do this. There's a reason I'm doing it. If it just impacts one person, fantastic. God loves each of us and is willing to use each of us to love and care and show his love to somebody else. But I keep those in my sunshine file, so I can always go back and look at those on darker days if I need it, I feel like that's just
that's
an encouraging
encouraging.
place. Yeah.
I love that. It's nice to know that you went through the rejection early on too. Like that's just kind of it seems like a rite of passage for a writer.
And I still get rejected. I still have ideas that get rejected, or chapters that get rejected, or, it's still, it's a rite of passage for sure in those early years. And then it's just something that you have to continue, but you don't stop, if you feel called to do it, you don't stop. Carrie, you would tell you, that's hilarious. You look super familiar to me. I was there from, let's see, 1987 to 1991.
You're muted.
81 to 85, but I have lots of connections back there. So
that's so funny. Yeah, you were right before me.
Well, and I have a very dear friend who now teaches there, but she did the same journalism and then went to Regent just like you did. And I was like, do you know Amy?
What is her last name?
Bone Bright.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's her
she
maiden
teaches.
name? Yeah.
No, that's her married, now divorced name.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was, gosh, now I can't think of her maiden name, but anyway.
That's so funny. Yeah, that was my journey for sure. I'm sure I'd recognize her even if I haven't. I don't remember her name.
But yeah, I always like to find the fellow LU alums and read their books. I think actually I knew that about you before today, and I was like, oh wait, I gotta get there. So
that's so fun. Yes. Liberty before it blew up. Yeah.
Right. Well, we were actually there. My dad graduated in the founding class in 1975. So then I went back and I graduated in 85, and then my daughter graduated in 2011.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it's like a generation thing for you guys.
Yeah.
Got legacy going on over there.
Yeah.
So
That's
cool.
great.
Melanie, I want to ask you real quick, what is your favorite book of yours that you wrote?
It's a great
I
haven't read anything by you, but I want to
don't tell the others because it's like your kids, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, but well, I'll tell you my best-selling book, and then I'll tell you my favorite. My best-selling book was Catching the Wind. And also one of my Legacy of Love books, The Runaway, as it's called now. Those are my two best-selling novels. And Catching the Wind is actually a super special one because it was one that I was in a coffee shop here in our little town outside of Portland, and was like begging God for a story because I had no story and I had to get something to my publisher. And I was like, I have no story, Lord. And he just gave me this picture. Like, it wasn't a vision. It was just kind of like this picture of this boy and this girl in this tree house in Germany in 1938, right before the war. And I knew they were going to have to run away. And that's all I had. And that was it. And so I just started building their characters and their story from that. And that's totally a Holy Spirit. It's called Catching the Wind because it's about the Holy Spirit. I mean, truly, it's all parable-ish, but that's really that story. But my favorite novel to write is called Shadows of Ladenbrook Manor, which was set in the 1950s in England. And it's about a little girl who grows up who's on the autism spectrum before they knew what the autism spectrum was. and went to England. She's an artist, beautiful storyteller, and it's her mama's story, Maggie's story, and it's her story. And so it was just a story of my heart. It didn't sell huge, but those are a lot of my Sunshine Files is based on that story. You know, a lot of people are like, they like the Catching the Wind story. It's more dynamic and lots of tension, where Catching the Wind is just a heart story. Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was wondering where to start with your work. So those are good. That's a good recommendation. Any last questions for Melanie?
Just a quick one about your 17-year writers group.
Yes.
Are they all published?
So through the years, people have gotten published, and it's so funny. A lot of times after they get published, then they step away, which, that's because they've then become really busy with the publishing world. But let's see, our current group, they're all, one is publishing short stories, but she wants to do a novel, but her short stories are published. One of my girls who, not my girls, like that, like they're my girls, but she's like 35, but she's been writing for her whole life. But she just got her first traditional contract, and she's been part of the group probably for 12 years, I'd say. So she's been on a long drive. She works full time too. But it's coming out in Baker. Nicole Miller's her name, and it comes out this summer by Revell. So that's her dream publisher. She really wanted to go the traditional route. And then one of them just got a contract for a traditional publisher, and one has done a ton of nonfiction, but is trying to move over to the fiction world. And so she's trying to decide indie or traditional publishing. So they're all in the right route. Yeah.
I just wondered if it's hard to be in a group like that if you're all in, wildly different stages and phases.
A good question. And we are at a bit of different stages and phases, but everybody's a reader. I think that's the most important thing. And it's just so funny because now we kind of have our roles. This didn't happen intentionally. But it's like, one person's really good at grammar and copy edits. One person's really good at the personalities, the psychology of it. One person's really good at the tension. One person's really good at the romance part of it. So everybody's got their thing that's super valuable. And we just discovered this. And so, we'll get to one person will be like, I think this is wrong, but Julie's going to have to tell us that, and so she will. And so we all have our thing. And for my writing, even though I have the most books out, I still learn every single month from their perspective as readers and one's a librarian. She has been for 30 plus years. And so she knows her stuff, even though she's just newly published. And it's been super helpful. So that's a great question. Everybody's input, once they're willing to feel secure and confident enough to give it, everybody's input has been super valuable.
I love that you're doing community, because that's what this group is about too. Go ahead, Carrie.
So we've talked a lot in this group about the difference between self-publishing and traditionally published work. Yeah. And a lot of times I'm wondering, for me, it would be a lot easier to give up a fiction book to a traditional publisher, because if they change the story, they're probably not going to change it to the detriment of the message.
Yeah.
But I feel like it concerns me about going the route of traditional publishing with a devotional, a Bible study, a nonfiction work, where you're a little bit more, married to the message. Mm-hmm. So do you have any words of wisdom to speak into that?
Oh, I don't know that I have words of wisdom per se, except for my first book was nonfiction. They did change our message, and they changed our title. And it was became a book that, it's not that we're not proud of it. It just was very different. That it was a girlfriend and I that did it. It was a book for single women back when I was single. And it was it's supposed to be a girl's guide to life or something like that. And they changed it. Oh, they wanted to change it to cold pizza for breakfast. They wanted to name it. We're like, wow, that's nothing to do with the book. They thought that and they changed it to latte for one and loving it or something like that, which is more clever and cute. But it wasn't our heart behind what we were writing and what we were doing. So it's a valid concern. That being said, if you have a good we were unagented at the time. If I had a good agent at the time, they would have come in and said, this is not the direction, you know, all of that. So I would just make sure if you do traditionally publish unagented, which is totally viable, you can do that for sure still. Just make sure you attach the synopsis, you agree to what the piece is about, you know, what you're about, so that they don't come in and change it on you. And that really, I mean, we're very blessed to be in 2024 and have the option to indie publish and make sure that we're getting, you know, exactly, you know, what we want out there. That being said, if you indie, of course, make sure you have editors, make sure you have readers that read up front, and make sure you're saying what you're meaning to say in the book. Yeah, it's a great question.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time, Melanie, and everyone here. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes,
This has
thank
been
you.
delightful. It's just been great to meet you, and I'm so thankful for our mutual friendship
Mhm.
that brought us to get to know each other. So we're really grateful that you joined us here on the Writer's Block today.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you all so much, and thank you for your kind notes. That's so sweet. Yeah, thank you. It's been just delightful. I've enjoyed meeting
Yeah.
with you.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you again, Melanie.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.